So real quick, want to just figure out where everyone's at in the audience. Who's using Docker here? All right, cool. Not going to get into Docker too much. Who's using Selenium? Oh, yeah. All right. Who's using GitHub? VJ, you see that? The hands down there? They're probably using GitLab's Bitbucket. That's where you want to be. All right. Well, Jenkins. All right, cool. Well, it seems like a lot of people are using the same tool set that I'm going to be demoing today, as well as what I used back at Yahoo Mail. So real quick, my name's Neil Manvar. I currently serve as a solutions architect for SOS, and what I'm trying to do is show the industry how to deliver quality code frequently. What I mean by quality code is it's been tested using automation, and you know all of your features are working in all the different browsers, if you're a web application, or all the different mobile devices, Android, iOS, and all the different versions, if you're working on a native mobile application. What I mean by deliver frequently is now that you know this is quality code, let's get it to production. You wrote it for a reason. It was either a new bug fix, right? Fixing something that wasn't working, or it was a new feature all in all. So let's get that in front of the user, get them testing it, get them using it, and get that feedback, incorporate that into our development and release cycle, and keep on accelerating, keep on delivering quality code frequently. So today what I want to show is a demo of testing in isolation, which is essentially testing before it even makes it into the master code base, and a continuous deployment pipeline, which ensures every commit makes it to production without any manual intervention. Just a gauge of hands, who's releasing, let's say, about more than once a month? All right. What about more than once a week? All right, we got a couple here. Anyone releasing on every commit, continuously deploying? All right. Cloud bees over there. Obviously, that's Jenkins. So what I'm going to show here is from a developer perspective. The product manager has asked me to make a change. I'm going to go ahead, make that change, and watch it go through the entire pipeline. Also, as I'm making these changes, I'm going to get feedback very frequently. And that's what's really critical here. As a developer, if I know that what I'm writing is not going to work in IE9 or Chrome or something like that, I wouldn't have wrote it in the first place. The problem is that they're not getting the feedback soon enough. If you're running automation every night or once a week, that means hundreds of commits are going into that, and then you're running automation against it. And when tests fail, you don't know why they failed. Oh, 10 tests failed, but 100 commits went in. Which commit do I need to revert? Which commit was the offending piece? Does anyone have this problem here today? I see a few nodding heads. Yep. And at any point, if you guys have any questions, just raise your hand. I want this to be a useful discussion for everyone. And also, if you have the question, someone else probably in the audience have the question. It's probably my fault for not describing it correctly. So real quick, at the high level, what I'm going to show is me as a developer. I've gotten my request from my product management to introduce some new feature, and I'm going to issue a pull request. Once I issue a pull request, that's going to kick off some process in my CI system, which will run through my acceptance criteria. Today, I'm mainly going to define my acceptance criteria as unit tests must pass, code coverage must not be decreased, and functional tests must pass. Then I'll get the feedback regarding whether my branch and my pull request is quality code. So either I'll get the safe to merge or not safe to merge, then someone else can review it. If it's all good, merge it in, and then it goes on with the rest of the pipeline. All right, any questions so far? All right, let's get into the meat of it. So the demo. Here's the technologies I'm going to be using. Jenkins for my CI and my orchestration engine. Github for source code management as well as pull requests. So that's what's going to trigger the CI. Using Docker to package my application and then deploy that guy. My source code is in AngularJS. Anyone using AngularJS out here? A few. I think SOS is an AngularJS shop as well. Karma Jasmine for running my unit tests on various browsers, which will run on SOS. Anyone know why you should run unit tests within the browser? Exactly. Browsers have different JS and CSS specs. So if you can run a unit test on a browser and it fails, then you know that this specific unit or this piece of code is not IE10 compliant per se. Whereas if you run on Phantom.js or something like that, none of your users are really using Phantom.js. So you can get your feedback regarding whether your JavaScript is valid JS and is supposed to do what it does, but you don't get the feedback regarding whether it's going to work in a certain browser. Also, if a unit test was going to fail in a certain browser, that means the functional test is going to fail. Fail fast, fail early, and you can isolate the error to a specific unit of code. Anyone doing unit testing within the browser today? A few folks. I see it catching up in the industry and more are doing it. And then lastly, the last piece in the acceptance criteria is the functional tests. My functional tests are written and run using Protractor, which is a layer on top of Selenium, and is the functional testing solution for AngularJS. Anyone using Protractor out here? All right, cool. All right, with that, I'm going to get started. I'm really finicky on the keyboard, so let me know if there's too much movement on the screen and you guys can't keep up or just don't know what's going on. All right? So here is my application. It's just a sample AngularJS app, and you click tab 1, it takes you to view 1. There's this data entry, or this data table, and we see 31 and 32 in there. Now you can go in here and enter stuff in, and it'll get put into the data column using AngularJS's two-way binding. So my product manager has asked me to insert a remove button right here, where when I click that, it'll remove the last entry in the data table. So basically pop, all right? Everyone clear with that? So if we were using Jira or whatever, I pick up that task, and then I go to develop. First step, let's create a new branch, right? Who's committing to master? If you are, bad. All right, here we see the HTML and we see the submit button. So right next to the submit button, we're gonna create a remove button. Make sense? We're gonna start with the markup, then we're gonna go to, I think, the controller, and then we'll go from there. So we go here, and now we see a remove last data button in the UI. We don't have any JavaScript written, so it's not going to do anything yet. So let's go ahead and get that written. All right? Hey, I forgot my first step. No one corrected me. I didn't create a branch. So next, let's go to the controller. Can everyone hear me? Yes. All right. It's getting a little hard to type and bring the mic up every time, so I'm going to just use my natural voice for now. All right, let's go to the controller. Here, there's a function for insert data. What we're going to do is add one for remove data. And what this is going to do is just call the service. So now what we're going to do is go to the service and add the function in for removing. All right. So now let's give this a run. Yes, so far?
Shouldn't you have written your unit tests before you did?
We're getting there. So what's going to happen? You're stealing my thunder, man. But what's going to happen is the build is going to catch it. So when I issue a pull request, my build will run, and it's going to do a code coverage calculation. And it's going to see that I wrote source code that is essentially untested, right? So it's not going to allow me to get this source code in. So this is for all you guys that aren't writing unit tests for your... It's not funny, write unit tests, man. Seriously. I mean, if you don't, the whole problem is you get to release time, and your manager or product manager asks, what's the code coverage on this guy? First of all, you might not even have a code coverage mechanism, so then you go and install Istanbul or whatever code coverage technology that you want to use, and then you realize, hey, I have 15% code coverage. When I was working at Yahoo, we had a minimum of 70, I think it was 70% that we had to have 70% code coverage before anything makes it out to production. So imagine if you're supposed to release tomorrow and you have 15% code coverage and maybe still some bugs out there. What are you going to do? Concentrate on the bug fixes or get all your developers writing unit tests? And when you're writing unit tests just to write unit tests, they frequently turn out not to be good tests, not meaningful tests. You're just writing tests to hit lines of code and achieve a code coverage. We've all been there, done that. So, all right, let's keep going. Oh, cool. All right, let's refresh this. Let's add some data in here. Cool, right? We're good. So let's go ahead and issue a pull request. I'm going to do all my Git actions through Sublime, but it's just Git stuff. And you're going to see a bunch of menus pop in and out and whatnot. So let's see what changed. We see that we changed the controller, the service, and the view. So stage, stage, stage. So add remove button, right? Let's push this guy. Now let's go to my repository. Everyone keeping up with me so far? Any questions? I'll take a moment to pause. All right. We go here. We see what we changed. We add the remove data. We added the JavaScript for it, as well as the UI or the HTML. So we're going to go ahead and create a pull request. Now what's going to happen is it's going to alert my CI system. Starting to get finicky already. So here we go. It says some pending checks haven't completed yet. So what happened is via webhook, it hit my Jenkins box and said, hey, I have this new branch, that new pull request that just created. Could you, check it out and run the tests against it? And all of that is actually governed right here. So if you see this make file, all my build is doing is calling make all. So it's going to do setup, static code analysis, run through my unit tests, where here's my code coverage checking script, and then run through my functional tests. So let's see this build in action. So here it already, missing semicolon, JS hint. So you see I already wrote bad code. So it says controllers.js, line 26. So that got caught as part of my static code analysis. Everyone familiar with static code analysis? Why didn't any of you guys catch my semicolon error? Are any of you paying attention?
Serve the beer first.
Okay. All right, so let's go fix that. Controller.js, line 20. Right here, right? Forgot that guy. Oops. So now when I commit to this, it'll run that build once again. So let's see right here. Here we see a new build is coming, or running. So let's go to that new build. So it's right here. So it didn't even get to running the unit test part because all my JS was not correctly formatted or syntactically correct, which was caught by my static code analysis or JS hint. Anyone using JS hint around here? All right, good. I remember there was this time at Yahoo where we wanted to start using these new tools, and JS hint was one of them. And if you haven't JS hinted or JS linted your product ever, it's going to cause thousands and thousands of problems. And we literally had to go through all the old files and fix all those issues, whether they were trailing white space, missing semicolon, incorrect indentation. But once we did it, the code looked nice. What plugin? Yeah. I am using the GitHub pull request plugin. Yep, I can show off that later as well. Good question.
Is there a reason why you didn't do a pre-commit check static code analysis?
So run it locally, you're saying? Yeah, I could have run it locally and everything, but then I would have had to set up everything locally. Now, if I can just be in my text editor and be in CI, that basically means I'm productive. So I can keep on doing this and have these tests executing in the background. Also, ultimately, these tests are going to execute in CI, so that's why. But yes, I could have run this locally as well. I can still do that right now. The thing is, sometimes, I might run it locally and just run the tests on one browser, let's say just functional or unit tests. But in CI, or in this build process, is going to run across all the browsers I support. So what happens in CI ultimately dictates where my code can go, or how far it can go.
Well, I'm fine with the unit test running on CI. It's just the static code analysis can be done very quickly.
Yeah.
And only on the files that you touch.
Yeah.
So it would be much
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, if this was a real project and a real development environment, I would have had a file watcher and then every time run JS hint and even maybe my unit test every time I click save. So that's what you're alluding to? Yeah, definitely. So actually you guys didn't catch my semicolon. I didn't even want to get into this JS hint piece, but it's okay. I just forgot the semicolon. And I do have an oracle or a source of truth here, but obviously I'm not doing too well at following it. All right? But I do agree with you. As early, shift left, catch it even before you commit it, right? So I do agree. But the big piece is that code like this should not make it into the master repo. So that's what this build is essentially gating against. So I think we're on the same.
So with a small team, that's not that big of a problem. But when you have a lot of team members committing a lot of code at the same time, you're going to waste a lot of resources that you could have saved just by running it locally first.
Yeah, precisely. So as a developer, you should be running this locally before you commit. Yeah, here I wasn't being the best of developers and I consumed more resources than I should. But really it's about catching this bug early. Like this would have done damage much later in the pipeline, so as long as it doesn't get into master, I'm fine. I want to keep my code base pristine, and whatever makes it into master should be shippable, right? That's what essentially continuous delivery translates to. And we're trying to build, test, and deploy everything and automate all that. But if master is clean and whatever makes it into master can be shipped, that's how you're going to be successful with continuous delivery. All right? So this build ran again. Let's see what happened. It failed. So let's just pull that guy up. Sorry. Starting to be finicky again. So here, another one. God. Yeah, another one. Bad, guys. All right. That's okay. I wanted to watch this thing run anyways. So here we go. The build is coming in. Anyone doing this already? Running tests on pull requests and gating commits into master, testing isolation? All right, a couple. 3, 4, cool. So here, the first thing it's going to do is start up Sauce Connect. To run the unit test, it's going to, within the Sauce browsers. First of all, everyone familiar with Sauce Labs? Who doesn't know what Sauce Labs is? A couple of people. Okay, that's fine. Sauce Labs is a cloud test infrastructure for Selenium and Appium. We have all the different browsers, platforms, operating systems, mobile devices, emulators, simulators. So every time you run a test, it spawns up a fresh VM bootstraps it with the operating system, the Selenium, and the browser that we want to test on, runs the test, and destroy the VM. So a reproducible environment for your tests where you can throw all your tests massively at scale. They execute in parallel. I get the feedback soon. So here, it ran tests on Sauce Labs using Karma. So here is my Karma conf. I said run my unit tests on Chrome, IE, and Firefox. And here are my unit tests. So I have one for loading the data, so making sure 31 and 32 are already in there. One for inserting, so when I put 8 and 9 and then insert the data, I should get 8 in there. And then one for the reset. Any questions on the unit tests? Pretty simple. All right. So if we look on Sauce, we can see that some unit tests have passed. You can see that these were started a minute ago. But why, if the unit tests pass, why did my build fail? Now this is getting back to that point that you mentioned about the unit tests. So let's go down here and see why this failed. Oh, my code coverage checker failed. Code coverage failed because of drop in code coverage numbers. Previously, I had 100% code coverage for my project. Does anyone have 100% code coverage? 100% is ridiculous. This was actually by coincidence. I wrote a couple of unit tests, and my application was like 19 lines long, and I happened to hit every line. It wasn't by design. But you want the higher you can get, the better. And I dropped it to 90%. So that makes sense. I introduced 4 or 5 new lines of source code. That dropped it to about 90%. Any questions on the code coverage piece right now? Sorry.
So if it's like fails, if you just drop it into coverage.
So you're saying drop that into the pull request?
Yeah, can you like set this model?
Yeah. Yeah, so I plan on improving this demo even more. This is just the start of it. But what I would have wanted to happen here is if it failed on the code coverage piece, it would have issued a comment on this guy saying that previous code coverage was 100%. It dropped to 90%. So I wouldn't even have to look at my build. If I can keep developers in the text editor and in Git, that means they're writing and committing code. The less they have to interface with Jenkins, the better. I want to automate that entire process. Does that make sense? Right? All right. So let's just, did that answer the question? Or? OK. So we know that we tried to commit untested code in, the build failed, and I looked into why it failed, and now I'm going to do something about it. Also, what this is doing is making sure we never introduce legacy code. Legacy code translates into untested and unmaintained code. If you've tested the code, you know at least how the code behaves, what purpose it's serving. And unmaintained, if you don't have it tested, then it's eventually going to be unmaintained. OK, so let's go ahead and write that unit test. So here we go. All right, I'm going to take my time this time and no more missing semicolons. I thought you were checking me, Brent. You're my live compiler. All right, so it should remove data. All right. So let's copy the first 2 lines. All right, and then let's do an expect scope data to equal array object data 1 11 and 12. So this is actually, I think, so this is actually going to equal 31 and 32 because 31 and 32 are in the data table by default. We added 8 and 9 here. We insert the data, and then we remove 8 and 9. So now we expect 31 and 32. Does that make sense? All right. So to your point, you said, why we should be able to run this stuff locally before it even gets in pre-commit. So let's make sure that this runs locally. So first part would be starting up Sauce Connect, so I can get the Sauce VMs to have access to the source code and run the unit test in that against that. So here it's going to start that up. And this is how I run my unit tests. Let's see if we're missing any semicolons. Are you guys checking me? I think we're good. All right, Sauce Connect is up. Let's run these tests. So let's go to Sauce, and we should see these VMs spin up, which they did, and run the tests against it. So let's see if everything passes. Success, success here. We're good. So we wrote a good unit test. Let's go ahead and commit that unit test. So what's going to happen now is this process is going to re-trigger the build. It's going to run through my acceptance criteria again. This time we expect unit tests to pass and then go on to functional tests. All right? Let me commit this. All right. So now we go to the build, or we'll see a new commit come in here. And then we should see a new build go down. Here we go. All right. So once again, repeat the process, start Sauce Connect, do JS hint, run my unit tests. We expect unit test to pass. Then what's going to happen is we're going to try to deploy and test. What we're going to do is create a Docker container, deploy that locally on the build slave, and then run tests against it. I'm able to run tests against localhost, being the build slave, because of the Sauce Connect piece. And we're going to use protractor for that. So let's look at the protractor configuration file. Here I've specified multi-capabilities, meaning that I want to run on all of these browsers in parallel, and I've defined Firefox on OS X, Chrome on Windows 7, IE 11, and Chrome on Windows 8. And I could add on to this as I want at will. So let's say I also supported, Safari or something. I could add that in as well. Microsoft Edge. Everyone testing on Microsoft Edge? I hope so. If not, you're going to hear some problems coming up. All right. So here what's happening is it's building the Docker container. This might take a little while because I have a medium instance on EC2, an M3 medium, so it's not too powerful. So it's doing some lifting. So the beauty of Docker is now once we have this container, I can then promote this container all the way to production. I know exactly what I'm going to be shipping into production. Is anyone else using Docker the same way? All right, couple. So give it a second. It's still building the container. And then what we're going to see are tests execute in parallel on Sauce. And these are the functional tests, the Selenium tests. So they're actually going to launch a browser, go to my application under test, and run through the functional tests. So here we go. We see 24 instances of WebDriver being instantiated, which means I should see 24 tests occur in parallel, which I see right here. And let's just watch one of these tests. Hopefully it doesn't finish by the time I launch this. All right, here we go. This test entered in some data here, clicked add data, and then verified here. So we can watch this test go down. Here's the video. So it went to my application under test. And then, let's view that again. It might have happened too fast. Here we go. It went to my application under test, click tab 1, put some data into here, and then verified the data made it down here. All right? Yeah?
Are all the protractor tests, is there a way to create those by like following your process through the website, or do you have to write like insert 32 in that field?
Okay. Yeah, could you repeat the question so the people that are going to watch a recording are going to...
I was wondering if the protractor tests
Mhm.
are written by hand, or if you can like use a macro in Chrome and record.
Okay, so you're talking about record and replay? Yeah, so first let's take a look at the script and then I'll answer the question. So this script was the add data. So here we see that we click on tab 1, we put 3 and 4 into the input fields, click submit data, and then verify we see 3 and 4. So this would be a handwritten test case. Now you can record and replay, but what's not going to happen is it won't be a quality test case like this, because record and replay doesn't understand what the best selector method is, explicit weights, and so on. It's just blind clicking, and then it just translates those clicks into some code, and it doesn't have any insight on actually what needed to happen. So you could record and replay this, but always the best stable test case will be handwritten. Does that make sense? So previously the industry did try to record and replay with Selenium RC and a lot of the previous direction with Selenium and some of the other automation technologies. But now it's become clear that let's handwrite these test cases and let's have people that are knowledgeable about the code write tests saying what the code is expected to do. Does that make sense? So for example, when you record and replay, it wouldn't know to use the IDE per se. It might use a complex XPath selector or a complex CSS selector, which in return can cause flakiness to your test because you're taxing the DOM more, as well as it's not as performant. The fastest query will be by ID or class name, since JS has native support for that, right? Document get element by ID and so forth. Does that make sense? So I do encourage you to write your own test cases. Pick a test automation framework you like. Most likely there's a Selenium binding for that language. So let's say you like Cucumber. Go ahead and use the Ruby binding and so on. Here I'm using Protractor, right? So JavaScript. Yeah.
Is there like we do a lot of graphical things where you have like a slideshow that someone wants to drag to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Those are, when we tried to do those with Protractor, it's like mouse down over there and move your mouse and then mouse up again to move it, but those are very hard to write manually.
Yeah, so the advice I can give you there is create helper functions. So anytime you have to drag and drop, just create a starting element or starting coordinate and an ending coordinate and reuse that code. So don't do that heavy lifting or that complex work more than once. So it will be hard the first time. You will have to write it from scratch. For example, we had some drag and drop stuff in my old product that I used to work for, and doing the exact click here, move to here, drop mouse up here. That was the way that it worked in all of the browsers, but we created a helper function around it called drag and drop, and that seemed to work. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's also the beauty of Selenium, is that it's doing it from the outside in perspective. It doesn't have any knowledge about your code. It's doing exactly what the user would. And also, if something's not visible, as it would be for the user, Selenium will throw an error. So if it works via Selenium and your Selenium test passes, you have high confidence that this is quality code and it can be pushed to production. Now, if you're executing on all the different browsers and platforms that you support, you have even more faith in the code because now you know it works for Chrome, Safari, so on, right? Any other questions? 740. All right. All right, let's go on with this. So here, let's go here. Now we see that everything passed. Only now would I want to get someone to code review this. I know that this code is syntactically correct. It's functioning properly. It hasn't regressed anything. Actually, I lied. We don't know if it's functioning properly because I didn't write a functional test for my remove data, right? I unit tested it, but do I know whether it works from the UI within IE 11? No. So typically, what I would want to happen here is this build should catch saying that you wrote more than 5 lines of JavaScript. Why isn't there a functional test for this? Or some way notify me that you introduced a new feature and did not write a functional test for that. Any questions there? All right, so here it passed, but what would happen is someone would code review this. Oh, you introduced some remove data functionality and you wrote the unit test. Yo, nope. Cannot merge until functional test is written. All right? And typically you want to close the pull request. For now, I'm just going to leave it open. All right? So I'm not done. I need to go write a functional test for this piece. All right, no problems. So let's create a new file here. Let's call it removedataspec.js. And let's go ahead and write the functional test for that. I'm just going to take this guy, copy him. All right. All right. So we click that. We send some keys into there. Click that. And right here, let's do remove data. And here, I know. So I think you know what's going to happen. Think so. So now what we're going to do is here, let's write expect. Let me just take all this out. Expect element by xpath trtd at class equal ng binding, and it has text equal to 33. All right. Okay, got it. Good catch. 33? Oh, no, it's okay, Brent. I don't think we can pair program together anymore. You're on your own. All right, let's just make sure that we have all the parentheses correct. So that one looks good. That one looks good. That one looks good. That one looks good. All right. So similarly, we're going to want to do one for 44 as well. And let's just verify that this selector is correct. So let's go to my application under test. Let me make this bigger. Let's go here. Let's put in 33. Let's put in 44. Let's pull up the debugger. Scroll down here. Let's go here. All right, yes, we're selecting it. So the selector I wrote is valid. Any questions here? One more time? No. It would have thrown an error. So thank you for whoever caught that on that side. All right. So here, we have the functional test for that. Everyone in agreement? We have a functional test? All right. So let's do a git status. We see we introduced a new test. So now, this process is once again going to repeat itself. Now, let's see what would happen if my test took, 4 or 5 hours. This exercise would have taken all day. I wouldn't have been able to run through these tests and then get the feedback soon enough. So that's why it's so critical that you run your tests in parallel and get the feedback to your developers as soon as possible. If this took 4 or 5 hours, for me to do this exercise would have taken like 20 hours, because you guys can see I went through 1, 2, 3, 4, and now 5. Now, all of these didn't run functional tests, but if they had, I wouldn't have got that feedback until 4 or 5 hours every time. Any questions there? So this is why some companies are running nightlies or running automation at an off hour, because they can't complete their tests quick enough on every commit or every commit onto master or on pull request, so that they're resorted on running all the tests in parallel at night and running on a set of commits. But that makes it all that harder, because when something fails, you need to roll back. Now, we can roll back to a stable state, which means revert all the 100 commits and then cherry pick each individual one in and run the automation against that. But that's a time-consuming process. Once again, I said I want my developers in the text editor or on Git, not debugging tests and debugging builds. If you can prevent that altogether, you're winning. You're keeping the developer productive. And it's all about developer productivity. And having all the checks in place, making sure that whatever's making it out is quality code. All right, here the tests are running. So let's take a look at that. We can just look at it here. Once again, it's going to construct that Docker container, because I made a code change, and then deploy it locally and run tests against it. And what's going to happen is now my new test is picked up, and it's going to run through that test. And I think you know what's going to happen, as you mentioned. So what's going to happen here is, I said by ID remove data, but in view1.html, it's remove data with a capital D. So my pull request build is even checking for the validity of functional tests. Doesn't it suck when someone just inserts a test into the repo or into the test code base, and then all of a sudden it's a bad test and your release doesn't go out because of a test that was written incorrectly, not because of the source code? Well, this makes sure that not even a bad test can make it in to the master code base. All code is code, whether it's source code, unit test, or functional test. It should all go through the pipeline, be tested and evaluated, and then we can move on to our production push. Also, something I didn't show is my whole goal is to get my change pushed out to this EC2 instance. So this EC2 instance is my production. And if you look at tab 1, you can see there's no remove data field. Does that make sense? So I'm only done once my change makes it out to here. All right? So here, the build failed. So let's go ahead and take a look at why the build failed. We see here, oh no, I'm looking at the wrong one, sorry. Right here, so it says no such element remove data, right? So let's go ahead and fix that. And we can also see, if we want to investigate more, is go ahead and look on the Sauce Labs interface, click the test, go to my commands page, go all the way to the bottom, and basically see this, and see that remove data didn't get a response. And I have the screenshot associated with that guy as well. So let's go ahead and change the functional test. All right, and this will trigger the process once again. Now this is repetitive, but as a developer, I'm getting feedback regarding my code changes, whether it's a functional test or source code, every like 2 or 3 minutes, or how long this build takes. So even if you have a lot of tests and you're executing them at night because of how long they take, you can execute one test in the pull request build, and that will make sure that one piece of functionality is not broken by the time it comes into master. So when we did this at my old place of work, we started with one test and then got to 10 and then kept on adding more tests in here. We had thousands of tests for every flow that we could imagine, but we couldn't execute all thousands of tests at the pull request stage, even if we ran them all in parallel really fast. So we did a select subset of tests, ran them all in parallel, and got that feedback as soon as possible. So we chose a certain set of functionality, which we called smoke, and we ran them on a few browsers. So that left the possibility of the build failing at a later stage when it runs all the tests, but we gained enough confidence that it probably won't fail because it works in Chrome and in another browser, and this is valid JavaScript. Also, whenever the master build failed, we introduced another check into the pull request build to make sure the master build would never fail for that same reason. So let's say that someone broke the compose flow, and we realized we didn't have a compose test case as part of the pull request build. That's the first thing we did. Make sure that same error or same issue doesn't happen again. Does that make sense? All right. So let's take a look at the build again. It's executing. It's doing the Docker stuff. And then it's going to run functional tests against that guy. So here we see now 28 instances of WebDriver. I introduced a new test case. I specified 4 browsers in my configuration file. So that should mean that test case gets run on 4 browsers. So before it was 24, 24 plus 4, 28. Make sense? Now all the tests are passing. We can see them right here. And also, if I wanted to debug while these are running, let me just show you one other piece. We also have a Jenkins plugin, which can, we can see the failed test cases right here, and show the sauce experience right inside of Jenkins, so you never have to leave Jenkins. So here we could have scrolled to the bottom. We see that this got no response. We see the screenshot at that point in time, and can do whatever else we want with that. So let's go here. All the tests pass. We can see pass here. All right, success. Let's look here. We get a pass. I'm going to have you guys code review this. So here we see the source code, some more source code, the functional test. And by the way, this last line in the functional test is saying, I expect there to not be an entry with 33 in it or 44 in it in the data table. So that's why it's expected to be false. Yeah? Yeah, that's not best practice. I would typically want to use IDs everywhere or class names and use one of them. Since this is just a prototype app and this is just my first iteration at this demo, that's the reason I'm doing it. That's not a best practice. So you want to stick with one. The only reason that you'd want to use XPath selector really, sorry? It can do a little more than CSS selectors can. In particular, here I have to use an XPath selector because I'm doing an inner text lookup. CSS doesn't have the context of CSS selectors don't have the context of what's inside. It's just using CSS attributes to traverse the DOM. It has a .text, yeah. But I also want to know that I'm drilling down into the data table because I could have had just a random, button with 33 in there, and that would have made it pass, right? So that brings me to another point: is you can't just write tests that pass. You need to make sure that they're going to fail, right? So if I did have a button that had the text 33 in there or input field or something like that or a span, the test would have passed, but it wouldn't have been serving the purpose of making sure 33 was not there, right? Does that make sense? So every time you guys write a test, once you guys get it to pass, make sure it fails. It's equally important that it fails. And if it doesn't, and that feature makes it out to production, and your manager comes knocking at your cube and says, "How did this make it out to production? I thought we had a test for this." And it comes down to a badly written test, I guarantee you that's not going to end well for anyone. All right, so here we got the functional test, the unit test, and the HTML or the view. This look good to everyone? So. Well, according to my definition, is done because the source code's there, the corresponding unit test is there. I did not jeopardize code coverage, and I have a functional test. So I give this a thumbs up. And then I'm going to go ahead and merge it in. Keep in mind, my EC2 instance has not changed, right? So I'm not done. I mean, I might be code done, code complete, but this change has not been pushed out to production. So let's get that addressed.
Hey, Neil, if I can add one thing.
Yeah.
One of the most important things about what Neil is talking about is that typically what happens is that companies have a tendency to do happy path testing. Is that they pick the 5, 10, 15, 20 critical path tests that they know that they have to do. But unfortunately, is that it doesn't encompass the coverage that they have to do. So when you use technologies that are available today, as Neil is showing, is that with Docker, with Jenkins, with Sauce Labs, with Selenium, with whatever, with Github, is that it allows you to do much more testing for your entire organization than you have to do. So you can actually concentrate on, a great example, is anybody here from Visa? So Visa uses us for regression testing. Is that what they used to do before they could do parallelization? Is that they would do happy path testing for about 10 test cases. And they would be for specific browsers or devices. Is that now what they do about 500. And then every time they do a code change, it does regression testing with us for about 500 so that they know that their testing coverage is totally encompassed for what they're trying to do versus just what they have time to do, which is very important. That's what Neil's talking about, is that using automation and technologies for getting what you need to get done, not within the time that you have to get it done.
Yep, precisely.
Thank you, good night.
So we covered this piece right here, right? The pull request build and testing in isolation. So now what's going to happen is I merge my test in, and another build is going to run. For me, this is my production build. But for a company or the industry, this would be the QA build. So you run some more tests and then deploy to your QA environment, right? So that manual testers can test it if they need to, or product managers can test it, or you can see the new feature and so on. And then you go through with the pipeline all the way to production. In my example, this QA build is a production build. What it's going to do, now that I've merged in, it's going to rerun my acceptance criteria, unit tests and functional tests and JSHIN and all that. And if all of that passes, it's going to push to production, my EC2 instance. So anyone know why we'd want to rerun the tests here? Because we've already ran them once up there, right? Anyone? It's because someone else might have issued a pull request too, and we don't know how my pull request or my branch behaves with the other branch. So we're testing the integration between branches. Does that make sense? We tested one branch in isolation up there. We tested another branch in isolation here. But how will those two code changes behave together? We don't know yet, right? So we're going to run through the test one more time. If all that's good, we're going to move through the pipeline. Now, when I used to work at my previous work, it was very similar. So we already talked about the pull request build, the QA build. So if the QA build passes, we would then push to QA. We'd leave the code on QA for a couple hours. We'd call that baking, in case anyone wanted to look at it, test it out, so forth. If no one complained, then the pilot build would run. The pilot build would run tests against the product and the packages on our pilot environment, which translated to every internal employee. I was working for Yahoo Mail, and every employee at Yahoo used Yahoo Mail as their email. So if the pilot build passed, it pushed the new beta version of Yahoo Mail to all the internal employees, including me, my CEO, Marissa Mayer, and everyone so forth. So if I broke it at pilot, that was very serious. Yahoo couldn't function the way it does without email. Marissa would say, you know, I have a board meeting and I needed to print out these slides and I can't print them out. Thank you. It might have happened once or twice. No, just kidding. So we let it bake on pilot for a few hours if none of the company complains. So essentially we've dog fooded our own product. Then we run the staging build. Staging build tests against the packages on staging and then deploys to 1% of production. We monitor a little bit. And these are all automated metrics checks. If none of those fire off, and say CPU is fine and hasn't increased by 20%, and we don't have CPUs melting through the boxes onto the floor and creating a half-inch hole in the ground, then the production build. So then we stage the rollout to all 100% of users. Does that make sense? So it was very similar to what I showed today. Obviously, the product is much more advanced. And they have to support a lot more browsers than my little prototype AngularJS app. But the approach is generally the same. So this build triggered, and it ran, which I had here. And it succeeded. So this was the build that listened on master. While Bill was talking, I merged it in so that we didn't have to watch the Docker. We didn't have to watch the Docker container get assembled, or the Docker image get assembled again, because it takes a little while. All right. So now, this triggered another build right here, SSH test, which then deployed my change to production. So I should see, hopefully, my change on production. Here's the EC2 instance. Here's my change. Let's verify it works. Actually, I know it works, because this is quality code that got deployed. All right, we're done. So that was the demo of testing in isolation and continuous deployment. Yeah? So JavaScript array pop, if you have an empty array, you're trying to get me to crash this, aren't you? There you go. Yeah, with JavaScript, if you have an empty array and you pop it, it just returns an empty array. I didn't. And that should have been caught during the code review phase, the saying, you know, so if you reviewed my code, I would hope that you say, you know, you didn't write all the unit tests for that. But the whole goal is to automate as much as you can. So, you know, the code coverage piece automated away the fact that, you know, I had untested code, and you didn't have to say, you didn't write a unit test for this, right? So every time you catch something as part of the code review, the whole goal is to put that same check into the pull request build so that I don't have to bug you for a code review when my code is actually not ready to be reviewed. Does that make sense? I only want you reviewing quality code. So only after I get the build to pass and all my tests to succeed, then only do I want to bug you and ask you for a code review. Everyone on the same page there? Yeah, I think, yeah. No one likes code reviewing garbage code. I don't know, some people might. Brent? No? All right. All right, well, that was my demo. I showed how to test in isolation and use that mechanism as an enforcement mechanism as well as a developer feedback mechanism. And then have a continuous deployment pipeline, which ensured whatever was merged was then pushed to production. So now my users, which I don't think I have any, can use my remove last data feature. All right, thank you guys. Thank you GitHub for the space.